The laundromat hummed with the familiar sounds of spinning washers and tumbling dryers. Just another quiet Tuesday evening in downtown Sacramento. Sarah Martinez methodically folded her son's school uniforms, humming an old tune under her breath. The same melody she'd sung countless times during those long nights over the Pacific, when the radio static was the only thing keeping her company at 30,000 feet. She didn't notice the elderly man in the corner freeze mid-step, his weathered hands trembling as they gripped his laundry basket. 23 years had passed since Marine General Robert Hayes had last heard that voice cutting through the darkness, guiding his damaged aircraft safely home. The voice that had saved his life and the lives of 47 Marines aboard his transport plane. The voice of Air Force Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, a woman he'd searched for decades to thank, never knowing she was folding laundry just 3 blocks from his own home. Sarah Martinez adjusted the broken strap of her purse as she pushed through the laundromat's glass door, the familiar scent of detergent and fabric softener greeting her like an old friend. At 42, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the weight of financial struggles that seemed to press down on her shoulders every day. Her nursing scrubs bore the telltale wrinkles of a 12-hour shift at Sacramento General, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of countless nights choosing between sleep and studying for her medical billing certification. She'd become an expert at stretching every dollar, making every sacrifice to ensure her 15-year-old son Marcus could focus on his studies instead of worrying about overdue rent notices. The laundromat on 5th Street wasn't the cleanest or the closest to their small apartment, but it was the cheapest. And that's all that mattered in Sarah's carefully calculated world. She selected her usual corner machine, the one with the slightly loose door that gave her a small discount if she mentioned it to the attendant, and began the methodical process of separating Marcus's school clothes from her work uniforms. As the washing machine filled with water, Sarah found herself humming softly, an unconscious habit that emerged whenever her mind wandered to quieter moments. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a tune she'd picked up during her military service years ago, though she rarely let herself think about those days anymore. Those memories belonged to a different version of herself, a woman who'd worn the blue uniform of the United States Air Force with pride, who'd guided aircraft through dangerous skies with steady hands and an unwavering voice. That Sarah had dreams of a military career, plans for advancement, hopes of making a real difference in the world. But life had a way of redirecting even the best-laid plans, and the woman folding faded jeans in a Sacramento laundromat was the result of choices made in split seconds that changed everything forever. She pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the practical task at hand, smoothing out wrinkles and checking for stains that might need pre-treating before the next wash cycle. The year was 2001, and Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez sat in the dimly lit air traffic control tower at Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, her headset crackling with static as she monitored the busy Pacific airspace. The storm had rolled in faster than anyone predicted, transforming what should have been a routine evening into a night of white-knuckled tension and split-second decisions. Rain lashed against the tower windows with such fury that visibility was nearly zero, and the radar screens painted an ominous picture of severe weather stretching for hundreds of miles in every direction. Sarah's training had prepared her for moments like this, but nothing could truly ready someone for the responsibility of guiding aircraft through conditions that pushed both machine and pilot to their absolute limits. Her voice remained calm and steady as she coordinated with multiple aircraft, each one fighting against hurricane-force winds and torrential rain that made navigation a deadly game of inches. When the distress call came through at 22:47 hours, her blood ran cold. Marine Transport Charlie 77 was declaring an emergency reporting engine failure and severe structural damage after being struck by lightning while attempting to navigate around the storm's most violent core. The voice on the radio was professional but strained, and Sarah could hear the fear beneath Major Robert Hayes' controlled words as he described his aircraft, his desperate situation. Charlie 77 was carrying 47 Marines returning from a classified mission in the South China Sea, and the twin-engine transport was losing altitude rapidly with one engine completely dead and the other running on fumes. Sarah's hands flew over her console, calculating wind patterns, fuel consumption, and emergency landing options while maintaining constant radio contact with the struggling aircraft. She could hear the storm battering the plane through the open comm channel, the screaming wind and rain creating a backdrop of terror that made her own heart race with sympathetic adrenaline. Major Hayes reported that his navigation systems were failing. His compass was spinning wildly, and the GPS was giving contradictory readings that made it impossible to determine their exact position in the massive storm system. Sarah knew that without her guidance, Charlie 77 would likely disappear into the Pacific, becoming another tragic statistic in the dangerous world of military aviation. For the next 4 hours, Sarah became the lifeline connecting a damaged aircraft to survival, her voice cutting through static and storm noise like a beacon of hope in the darkness. She abandoned standard protocols, instead using her intimate knowledge of Pacific weather patterns and ocean currents to guide Major Hayes along a path that existed only in her mind. A route that threaded between towering thunderheads and avoided the worst of the turbulence while conserving precious fuel. She talked the pilot through emergency procedures he'd never had to use in real combat situations, coached him through engine management techniques that squeezed every possible mile from his remaining fuel, and provided constant reassurance to a crew that was facing the very real possibility of ditching in shark-infested waters hundreds of miles from the nearest rescue ship. Her shift had ended hours ago, but Sarah refused to leave her post, knowing that her voice had become the psychological anchor keeping 48 American service members focused on survival instead of panic. She sang softly during the brief moments when radio checks weren't required, the same melody she hummed now in the laundromat, not realizing that her unconscious habit was providing comfort to terrified Marines who clung to every word from their guardian angel in the tower. When Charlie 77 finally touched down safely at a small airstrip in the Philippines just as dawn was breaking, Major Hayes's voice cracked with emotion as he thanked the anonymous controller who had saved their lives. Sarah had guided them through the impossible, using skills and instincts that couldn't be taught in any manual, drawing on reserves of strength and knowledge she didn't even know she possessed. But her heroism came at a personal cost that would echo through the decades. During those critical hours, she had violated direct orders from her commanding officer to abandon the rescue attempt and focus on other air traffic. Her insubordination, though morally justified and ultimately successful, resulted in a formal reprimand and an early discharge that ended her military career before it truly began. She left the Air Force with commendations for her service, but no fanfare, no ceremony, and no recognition for the 48 lives she had saved in a single night of extraordinary courage and skill. General Robert Hayes, now retired but still carrying the bearing of a lifetime military leader, stood frozen in the corner of the Sacramento laundromat, his weathered hands gripping his laundry basket, as recognition washed over him like a physical blow. 23 years had passed since that terrible night over the Pacific, 2 decades during which he had risen through the ranks to become one of the Marine Corps' most respected generals. But not a single day had gone by without him thinking about the mysterious air traffic controller who had saved his life and the lives of his Marines. He had spent countless hours over the years trying to track down Staff Sergeant Martinez, working through official channels, hiring private investigators, and following every possible lead, but the Air Force's personnel records had been frustratingly incomplete, and his savior seemed to have vanished without a trace after leaving the service. Now hearing that same voice humming the same melody that had comforted him during the darkest hours of his military career, he felt his heart racing with the same intensity he'd experienced during combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Sarah looked up from her folding as the elderly man approached her washing machine, his distinguished bearing and confident stride marking him as someone accustomed to command even in civilian clothes. When he spoke her name, her rank and full name, she felt the color drain from her face as memories she'd carefully buried came rushing back with startling clarity. General Hayes introduced himself with quiet dignity, explaining how her voice had haunted his dreams for over 2 decades, how he'd never stopped searching for the woman who had talked him through the impossible and brought his Marines home safely when no one else believed it could be done. Sarah's hands trembled as she listened to him describe that night in detail, recounting conversations she'd forgotten and procedures she'd improvised in desperation, painting a picture of heroism that she'd never allowed herself to acknowledge. The weight of recognition, both the pain of being found and the relief of finally being understood, brought tears to her eyes as she realized that someone had remembered someone had cared enough to spend decades trying to find her and say thank you. The reunion that followed transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined when they woke up that Tuesday morning. General Hayes learned about Sarah's struggles, her early discharge, her years of working multiple jobs while raising Marcus alone, and the medical bills that had accumulated after her son's emergency surgery the previous year. But more importantly, he learned about her strength, her resilience, and the quiet dignity with which she had faced every challenge life had thrown at her since leaving the military. Within weeks, he had mobilized his extensive network of military contacts and veterans organizations to ensure that Sarah received the recognition and support she had always deserved. A retroactive promotion, full military honors, and a commendation that acknowledged her extraordinary service on that stormy night in 2001. The financial support came not as charity, but as long overdue recognition from a grateful nation, allowing Sarah to finish her medical certification program and providing Marcus with a college fund that would ensure his dreams weren't limited by economic circumstances. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah found herself part of a community again, the brotherhood and sisterhood of veterans who understood the true meaning of service, sacrifice, and the bonds that connect those who have worn their country's uniform with honor. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen in moments when no one is watching, when doing the right thing means risking everything for strangers you'll never meet. Sarah Martinez's story reminds us that true service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It lives on in the character of those who answered the call when their country needed them most. Her voice guided 48 Marines through the darkness 23 years ago. And today, her story guides us toward a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by the men and women who serve in our armed forces. If this story of courage, sacrifice, and long overdue recognition touched your heart, please honor our veterans by subscribing to this channel and sharing these stories with others who need to hear them. Every veteran has a story worth telling. Every act of service deserves recognition, and every hero, whether they wear medals or fold laundry in quiet dignity, has earned our respect and gratitude. Hit that notification bell to join our community of Americans who believe that no veteran should ever be forgotten. And together, we'll make sure their voices continue to echo through the darkness, guiding us all safely home.